The death of this teenage girl 17 years ago features in a devastating review of child sex abuse in Greater Manchester, which says many children were failed by the authorities and many still are.
Are you saying that you're still being inundated with complaints of abuse now?
Massively.
Current abuse?
Current abuse. Current abuse every day.
Now, a report into historical child sex abuse in Greater Manchester says that dozens of children suspected of being groomed by gangs were failed by the authorities, partly because of concerns about race relations. The review looked into Operation Augusta, which was launched back in 2004, following the death of 15-year-old Victoria Agolya, but was wound up too soon. An independent review says that police and social workers knew that children were suffering the most profound abuse. Our North of England correspondent Judith Moritz has more details.
Victoria Agolya lived a short and horrific life. Beaten, raped and injected with heroin. Living in care, the authorities knew what was happening to her. Though the teenager was away from her family, her grandmother Joan tried to get help.
I phoned them and phoned them and phoned them.
But nothing was done, and Victoria died, aged 15.
They just didn't care. And all these men were doing all this to her, and they knew. They all knew about it, and they let them take her off. They even went into the homes, and they knew what was happening, and I told them what was happening, and they let them come in and just take her out.
Victoria lived in Rochdale. After she died, the police opened an investigation into child sexual exploitation in the area.
The investigation, called Operation Augusta, found that such abuse was happening here on a huge scale. Detectives suspected that as many as 97 men were grooming children as young as 12. But in 2005, before it could complete its work, that investigation was abruptly shut down.
In 2017, this BBC documentary about abuse in Rochdale was broadcast. As a result, a new review was ordered into the scale of the crime. Today, it found that Operation Augusta was shut down prematurely.
Our report has established that most of the children we considered were failed by Greater Manchester Police and Manchester City Council. The authorities knew that many were being subjected to the most profound abuse and exploitation, but did not protect them. This is a depressingly familiar picture seen in many other towns and cities across the country.
The police have now announced that they've begun a fresh investigation into non-recent child sexual exploitation in Rochdale.
I want to say that I'm personally disgusted that these children were not cared for and the awful abuse they suffered. I'm committed to doing all that we can to ensure that they receive the justice today that they were denied 15 years ago.
Maggie Oliver is a former detective who worked on the first investigation and became a whistleblower when the case was dropped.
It has almost destroyed me. I've lost my job, I've lost my home, I've lost my health.
She now feels vindicated, but warns against complacency.
They will still say now, well, lessons have been learned. Things are much different now 15 years on. Well, I will tell them that there are many things that are not any different. And that is because I know that to be the case.
Are you saying that you're still being inundated with complaints of abuse now?
Massively.
Current abuse?
Current abuse. Current abuse every day.
4 of the social workers involved have been referred to their professional standards body, and there are calls for a new inquest for Victoria Agolya. Her family say that even after today's report, they still don't have closure. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Rochdale.
With me in the studio is our home editor, Mark Easton. Mark, what on earth are people to make of the impact and the detail of this review?
Well, these failures happened in 2004 and 2005. Britain had just been through a period of soul-searching about the abuse of children. The new Children Act had just been passed. The authorities, I remember, were promising that lessons had been learned about how children needed to be put first. But lessons had not been learned, and some question whether lessons have been learned even now, because this comes, what was described today, as a result of a problematic institutional mindset. The victims were not seen as wholly innocent. They were children in our care, but they were children labelled by those in authority as prostitutes, as promiscuous, children who it was suggested had chosen to be exploited and should have managed their own behaviour. And the perpetrators, of course, were all from one ethnic minority, which the authorities recognised had itself been a victim of prejudice and racism. Now, we like to paint our society as neatly divided between the righteous and the wicked, between victims and villains. When those boundaries are not so clear-cut, and when budgets are tight, safeguarding can become less of a priority. And that's what happened, and I think is likely to happen even now, because it's easy to forget that however difficult and demanding they may be, we are talking about children, and their welfare must always come first.
Mark, many thanks again. Mark Easton, our Home Editor.